Welcome back to the Hawk's Adventures podcast. 6 episodes ago, we started with a Roman legionary holding a katana. We've covered 9 failure categories, a 3-stage correction pipeline, a layered prompt architecture, and a production-grade metadata system. Today is the finale. And the question I've been saving for last is the one that every creator working outside ancient Rome has been asking since episode 1. Does any of this transfer? My guest is back for the last time in this series. Let's close the loop.
The answer is yes, almost entirely. The pipeline is period agnostic. The prompt architecture is period agnostic. The metadata system is period agnostic. What changes when you move to a different historical period is one thing. The specific content of the accuracy constraints, the structure that enforces those constraints, stays identical.
But before the transfer mechanics, because you make this point explicitly in the article, we need the failures first. Every historical period has its own version of the katana problem.
Its own systematic defaults, its own predictable anachronisms, its own popular imagination that has drifted so far from the historical record that AI's training data reflects the fiction more than the fact. Let's start with the Viking Age because it has the single most jarring equivalent to the katana problem.
The horned helmet.
The horned helmet. This is the Viking equivalent, the most persistent, most embedded anachronism in AI-generated Viking content. Horned helmets on Viking warriors are an invention of 19th century Romanticism. They were codified in theatrical costume, in nationalist imagery, in opera sets, and distributed so widely that they now dominate the popular visual imagination of the period. The one near-complete Viking Age helmet recovered archaeologically, the Geirmundbu helmet, has no horns.
And AI generates them constantly.
So persistently that suppressing them requires explicit, repeated, negative prompting. Even then, they reappear. It is the single most important exclusion for Viking Age content. The thing you address first, before anything else, because it is the most immediately recognizable tell to anyone who knows the period.
What else does AI get wrong about the Viking Age?
Medieval armor contamination, the same bleed that puts Gothic plate on Roman soldiers puts it on Viking warriors. Viking Age combatants wore mail when they wore metal armor at all, brynja, chainmail. Plate armor of any kind is an anachronism for this period. The articulated gauntlets, enclosed visors, Gothic pauldrons that AI defaults to are wrong in exactly the same way they're wrong for Rome. The training data pool is the same. The contamination is the same.
The long ship problem. You describe this one vividly.
AI produces something closer to a fantasy galleon with Viking aesthetic detailing than a historically plausible drakkar. Real Viking longships were lean, low, and functional, built for speed and shallow water navigation. AI generates ships that are too large, too symmetrical, too elaborately decorated. The functional engineering of an actual longship is almost entirely absent from the default output.
And settlement architecture.
Viking Age settlements were timber construction, longhouses with turf or thatch roofs built to regional Scandinavian patterns. AI introduces stone fortification elements, medieval tower construction, European castle architecture that postdates the Viking Age by centuries. The correct Viking Age settlement looks nothing like a medieval castle. Nothing.
There's also a failure you call the berserker default, which is interesting because it's a social failure, not just a visual one.
AI defaults to the berserker archetype, wild-eyed, barely clothed, chaotically armed, for Viking warriors generally. This conflates a specific and rare ritual warrior tradition with the entire culture. Most Viking Age fighters were organized, disciplined, and equipped in ways that reflect genuine military culture. The berserker is to Viking imagery what the spectacle gladiator is to Roman imagery, the most dramatic, least representative version of the subject. The default emphasizes theatrical extremity over historical normalcy.
Let's move to feudal Japan. And you make a point early in the article that I found genuinely interesting. Feudal Japan is one of the most represented periods in AI training data, and one of the most consistently misrepresented.
Paradox of abundance. The volume of Japanese-inspired content in AI training data is enormous, but the dominant sources are fantasy, cinematic, and anachronistic. Anime, video games, wuxia-adjacent imagery, Hollywood samurai films. The training data is massive and historically unreliable, which means the failures are different in character from Roman or Viking failures. For Rome, the problem is that AI doesn't have enough Roman-specific data. For feudal Japan, the problem is that AI has plenty of Japanese-inspired data, and most of it is wrong.
The armor problem for feudal Japan is particularly specific.
Japanese armor evolved significantly across roughly 900 years. From the Heian period through the Edo period, AI collapses this entirely. Oyuroi lamella armor, appropriate to the Heian and Kamakura periods, appears on figures in Edo period settings. Tosei Kusoku plate and mail hybrid armor from the Sengoku period appears in contexts that predate it by centuries. The mixing is systematic and invisible to anyone who doesn't know the specific period being depicted. It takes a specialist to see it, and the specialist audience is exactly the buyer.
The lone samurai aesthetic. This is the social failure equivalent to the berserker default.
Exactly, parallel. AI defaults to the solitary, dramatically posed samurai warrior, a cinematic archetype rooted in 20th century film. Actual samurai were members of a complex bureaucratic and social institution operating within hierarchical structures of loyalty and obligation. The lone warrior aesthetic erases that institutional context entirely. You get imagery that looks feudal Japanese without being historically grounded in how the culture actually functioned.
And the katana comes back here, this time as a period mixing problem within Japan itself.
The katana is AI's default Japanese weapon regardless of period. Earlier Japanese sword forms, the tachi, the chokuto, the naginata as a primary weapon, are systematically underrepresented. Prompting for period-specific weapon forms requires explicit terminology and persistent negative prompting against the katana default. The katana started this entire series as the Roman problem. It turns out it is also the Japanese problem, just in a different direction.
Ancient Greece. And you flag something here that I don't think most creators would anticipate. The Rome-Greece conflation.
This is the failure that's specific to Greece. For Rome and the Viking Age, the contamination comes from later periods. Medieval bleed, 19th century Romanticism. For ancient Greece, a significant portion of the contamination comes sideways, from Rome. AI training data contains enormous volumes of imagery that blends Greek and Roman visual vocabulary without distinction. The result is images that are generically classical rather than specifically Greek. Roman architectural forms in Greek settings. Roman military equipment on Greek warriors. Roman social aesthetics in Greek domestic scenes. The Parthenon and the Pantheon are separated by 5 centuries and a civilization. AI treats them as interchangeable backdrops.
Hoplite equipment errors.
The Greek hoplite is among the most visually distinctive warriors in ancient history. The large, round aspis shield, the linothorax linen cuirass or bronze thorax, the Corinthian or Attic helmet with its distinctive crest. AI conflates this with Roman legionary equipment constantly. The aspis becomes a Roman scutum, the linothorax becomes lorica segmentata. The Corinthian helmet acquires a Roman neck guard. Each substitution is individually small and collectively corrosive to historical specificity.
And the white marble problem. You say it's even worse for Greece than for Rome.
The Parthenon and its kin are among the most reproduced images in Western cultural history, and they are universally depicted as white stone. The original structures were painted in vivid polychrome, red, blue, gold, green, on the sculptural friezes and architectural details, prompting for painted surfaces, visible pigment on architectural elements, and polychrome decoration produces dramatically more accurate results. And imagery that most viewers will find genuinely surprising because it doesn't look like anything they expect ancient Greece to look like, which is precisely the point.
There's also a failure you call the symposium and agora default, which is again a social texture problem, not just a visual one.
AI defaults to either battle scenes or monumental architecture when generating ancient Greek content. It collapses the enormous social and intellectual texture of Greek life into its most visually dramatic elements. The symposium, the agora, the gymnasium, the domestic oikos, the everyday settings where most Greek life actually occurred, require explicit prompting to generate, and they tend to drift toward Roman visual vocabulary without persistent correction. The pipeline that kept Roman domestic scenes from looking Victorian is the same pipeline that keeps Greek symposium scenes from looking Roman.
Now let's talk about the transfer mechanics, because this is the practical payoff for every creator who has been listening to this series and thinking, I work in Viking Age, not Rome.
The transfer requires changes in exactly one place, the historical consistency rule set in the audit prompt and its mirror in the corrective reprompting prompt. Everything else stays identical. The visual anchoring pass, the evidence confirmation pass, the negative knowledge gate, the tier validation model, the showcase worthiness rating criteria, the structured issue handoff format. These are architectural constants, period agnostic. They run the same way for Vikings as they do for Rome.
What specifically gets swapped out?
Weapon constraints replaced with period-accurate equivalents. Viking seax and Ulfbert sword forms instead of gladius and spada. Heian tachi instead of katana for early feudal Japan. Greek xiphos and dory spear instead of Roman short sword. Armor constraints replaced with documented period types. Viking brynja mail instead of lorica segmentata. Greek linothorax and thorax instead of Roman lorica. Architectural constraints replaced with period-specific forms. Norse longhouse timber construction instead of Roman round arches. And period-specific anachronism categories added. Horned helmets for Viking content, the katana default for any Japanese period, Rome-Greece conflation for Greek content.
What doesn't change at all?
The lighting constraints. Open flame is the correct constraint for all pre-industrial periods. Torches, oil lamps, braziers, open fire, no glass panels, no pipe runs, no conduit. This layer transfers to every period in this series without modification, and the corrective reprompting structure transfers without modification. The feedback loop, audit failure, becomes targeted negative prompt language, works identically regardless of period. The mechanism doesn't care what century you're working in.
Let's close the series the right way. 6 episodes ago, we had a Roman legionary with a katana. Where are we now?
We have a production-grade pipeline that begins with structured generation, runs every image through a layered audit, feeds failures into a corrective reprompting loop, catalogs outputs in a validated metadata system, and delivers a commercially licensed image archive that holds up to scrutiny from the communities that care most about getting it right. That pipeline adapts to any historical period where accuracy matters. It was built by running it, 4 months, 1,100 images, 9 documented failure categories, and every failure treated as information rather than waste.
And the through line of the entire series in one sentence.
Build the system before you generate the first image. The rest follows.
The Vault of Ages catalog, cinematic, historically accurate illustration for ancient Roman gladiator culture, is live now at hawksadventures.com. Viking Age and ancient Greek catalogs are in development, built on the same pipeline, held to the same accuracy standard. The complete production-ready prompt documents, the full Roman historical consistency rule set, the structured issue handoff format, the canonical failure tag vocabulary, the corrective reprompting template, are available as a free resource at hawksadventures.com. Personal and commercial licenses available. This has been the Hawks Adventures podcast. 6 episodes, 1 pipeline. Thank you for following this series.
Thanks for having me. Go build something accurate.